Coming to you from the Kelly Link Shrine in Nashville, Tennessee, I'm Greg Greene, and this is Chthonica, the show about horror in all its fictional forms. And wow, what a treat. We have Kelly Link here today. And Kelly, I'm such a huge fan, as you well know, and I'm just thrilled to be able to talk with you about some of the aspects of horror that are in some of your stories. And also, I've asked you about some particular horror tales that have kind of sunk their teeth into you, and what it is about those stories that you find so impressive. So, really, a thrill to have this conversation with you. How are you doing? How are you and your family and your chickens doing?
We are all good. It's very wet here. It has been for the last couple of days, and we have a necessary construction project going on, which is discombobulated everybody, but especially our dog. Our dog, must feel a little bit like a ghost story to the dog because things are being moved around. The furniture is covered in white sheets. There's a weird,
Oh, wow.
It looks a little bit like a serial killer set. There's a big sheet of plastic put up in the room. So every time she goes by, she's like, this is all deeply suspicious. But everything's good. The bookstore is good. Everything's pretty good.
I'm going to make the pilgrimage up there from Nashville at some point. I'm really
Excellent.
looking forward to being there. Yeah. And just very quickly, like Small Beer Press, you and your husband Gavin have been running this like indie press for several years. You brought us North American Lake Monsters by Nathan Ballingrud, one of the best horror collections. I think we'll be talking about that decades from now. It's such an impressive collection. Why did you guys decide to start a small press?
Yes. We began a small press around 2001, in part because we lived in Boston and then in New York. We knew a lot of people who worked in publishing. We knew Brian Chalfin, who ran a small press, put out a magazine, Crank. We knew people who are working at Tor, and we spent a lot of time talking with them about publishing and about their biggest regrets in running small presses. The amount of debt that they'd accumulated, the sort of things that had gone wrong. And we had been publishing a zine for a couple of years before that. And we felt that there was sort of a space in small press publishing, in part because I had a collection's worth of material that had gone out to editors that had been asked for by some editors, but they would always say, we really like this, but come back when you have a novel. We can't do short stories. And so we began thinking about the other writers that we really loved who had collections worth of material. And so we began to more deliberately talk about small press publishing with our friends in publishing, and eventually started Small Beer. And what is it now? It's 2024. So we ran it for over 20 years. My husband now has long COVID. And so the press is on hiatus. It may in fact be permanent hiatus. But we published over 100 books, I think.
Wow. I didn't realize there was that many. That's amazing.
Oh, yeah. Some reprints, a lot of collections, some work in translation, a lot of debut collections, some debut novels, a little bit of nonfiction. And we are very, very, I think, not just proud of the work that we did, but really grateful for the writers that we got to work with.
Wow. That's fantastic. And what a legacy to have. I follow a number of indie presses, and I kind of get a sense of both the struggle of authors to get their stuff published and the passion of these indie press publishers who really are trying to create a space and support authors whose work they really admire.
I think that everybody who works in publishing, or almost everybody, has a real sincere love of literature, of books, of forms of storytelling. And I think the difference with a small press is that that you are not going to be making a ton of money doing it. The odds of having a book that's a breakout book are very low. And so it frees you up to take on projects because you are passionate about them, because you do love those books. And, the downside is small presses are often a handful of people, or two people, or sometimes even one person. And so the hard thing is all of that work. It's wonderful when you're doing it to be able to work on the design, to do the editing, to be involved in every single aspect. But when you no longer have the energy for it, that's the end of the press.
Well, turning now to the subject at hand, is it fair to say that your stories mostly fall into the genre of magical realism? Is that something you would agree with?
I think that magical realism, although I recognize that as a term it gets more broadly applied, but it does have such a specific meaning, attachment to a specific geographical space, to a kind of political landscape as well, that I have always really liked. China Miéville's idea of the weird. I like the umbrella term of the uncanny. And I don't mind fantasy. I don't mind thinking, well, this story is fantasy, or this story is science fiction, or this is a ghost story. In a bookstore, I'm thinking about where we put my books in our bookstore. And we put them in fiction, in part because our science fiction, fantasy section, our horror section, we have so many books in there that honestly, it's a relief to move something into general fiction where we have slightly more space. So that's really an issue of space as much as anything. But I often just say, well, it's fantasy, or it's a ghost story, or it's, I'm working with fairy tales.
Do you think that genre is especially helpful?
Yeah, I think that they're sort of, I'm usually thinking about it from two ends, as sort of a person who's run a press, as somebody who has a bookstore. So thinking of it from the marketing aspect, where are people who like this thing most likely to find the book if they don't know this book already? And so science fiction, fantasy is great for that. When I'm beginning a story, I do think a lot about the genres or types of stories that I want to engage with. And so that is the point at which I think, well, I want this one to be scary, or I want to write a kind of ghost story, or I want to think about how a demon lover operates in the space of the uncanny. Who are the writers who wrote that kind of story? Or for White Cat, Black Dog, what fairy tales am I going to be drawing on? What are the patterns of fairy tales? And so then, yes, I am often thinking about specific genres or kinds of modes of storytelling. And those, if they are not exclusively in genre, science fiction, fantasy, horror, fairy tales, then there's at least a component of what a genre can do with a kind of an idea.
What do you want to do with horror that isn't really supported by other genres?
I think that I think that there is I'm going to forget who said this, but there is a writer, and probably more than one writer, who said that horror is one of the few dramas or the few genres of storytelling that wishes to produce an emotional state. Terror, pornography wishes to produce a certain kind of state. Melodrama produces a certain kind of feeling. And then once you're out of those categories, romance produces a certain kind of feeling. Once you're out of those categories, all of those feelings or emotional states are ones that you can reach by using certain kinds of technique. but the idea is not to specifically produce a kind of overwhelming emotional state. And I love horror as a reader. I find it, I'm drawn toward it as a writer because I think there's a feeling of the sublime there, of something that is, you're describing something which on some level is inexplicable, or you're not going to attempt to explain it, at least, but which produces a feeling as if something marvelous or something terrifying has come into the room with you. I got to be part of a conversation with Marina Enriquez and her translator, and Enriquez said that the thing that horror allows is it allows a space for the reader, but also for the writer, to experience the feeling, which is one that the world produces in us, but which is constantly sort of being presented with other kinds of information, with advertisements, with things that are funny. If it's in the news, there are also human interest stories, and there's stories about the school board, and then there will be a story which is absolutely horrifying. And so what horror does is it restores the space to experience the emotion that the world presents us with. And I think that's true.
It's interesting to hear the word sublime, though. I mean, which we think of as being, positive, heavenly, a beautiful vista or some kind of idea of bliss, but it is something that is beyond. I mean, I think people miss monsters. I think we kind of miss the idea that you could get in a boat, a ship, four-mast ship, go across the ocean, and if you were in that ship, the idea of coming across a giant sea serpent would not be a comforting one. But we've been across the ocean, and there's some creepy things down in the depths. But we've pretty much pushed all the boundary, all the unknown spaces away, and like the space where monsters could exist is gone. And I think there's a sense in which people miss that. Maybe that's kind of what helps fuel dragons and fantasy stories and whatever, or even creature features in horror movies.
Yeah, I think that that there is something, whether it's sublime or it's terrifying, whether it has kind of a that feeling of almost being in the presence of a miracle, but the monstrous, the kind of incongruity, the idea that something exists that we don't think should exist, that something that we are allowed to inhabit the same space with something that we feel should not be there, is horrifying or monstrous, but it also does feel sublime because it signals that as you said, the world is bigger than we thought it was, and that it contains things that we could not imagine until that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something comforting in that. I think it says even about ourselves as readers that there are parts of us which might be terrifying to contemplate, but it doesn't mean that they don't exist. It doesn't mean that and I think it's also the idea of monstrousness. A lot of horror takes that and sort of turns it on its head, so that the monstrousness becomes beautiful, becomes worthy of interest, maybe is a better way of saying. And it's the kind of thing which we are told not to look at, and it restores that to sort of a place where we say, well, why shouldn't we look at this? Why shouldn't we? If we are mortal, and if at the end of our lives we die, and if we can't predict that moment, there's something terrifying in that, but there's also something sublime in it. And I think horror is a way of creating a space in which we can think about these things which we often don't want to think about.
Yes. I think that idea of finding the monstrous within ourselves even the monstrous within like our families, within our parents. And looking at this list of stories that you've shared with me, there's a whole lot of that seeking, being unwilling to just accept what one is told by the authority figure, the parent, or especially the parents, and seeking the truth, though finding the answer to your questions is devastating. And yet the truth has been found. There's an honesty there, or an honest recognition of the state of human nature and the human experience that's in there. Let's turn to this first story, My Father's Mask by Joe Hill. Why did I asked you about like some stories that you thought were good horror stories that really kind of sank their teeth into you. Well, what do folks need to know about My Father's Mask by Joe Hill?
It opens with a family who may be on the run, or they may be sort of playing a game. They're a family who have been very lucky. They sort of come from a lucky family, and stuff has begun to happen, which suggests that the luck has turned. The patriarch, the grandfather, has recently died in a pretty horrifying accident. There's the idea of maybe a compact that needs to be remade. And it feels like a sort of update of almost a Greek myth. But one of the things that I love about it is, the way that it opens with the mother saying to the son, well, let's play a game. Let's pretend that we're, that there's bad things are sort of after us.
The playing card people.
Yeah, playing card
people.
Yeah.
Who, the way she describes them, it's obvious. Like, no, she's just making up some stuff.
Oh, yeah.
They can become so thin they can slip under doors and things like that. So she's just trying to freak them out, it seems.
Mm-hmm. But I think because it's a story and because it's right up there in the beginning. Like, well, it's a game, but what if it's not a game?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I love about it is it feels mythic.
Yeah.
That it feels Corn King, Spring Queen. It has sort of a feeling as if something very ancient is being reenacted. But the main character in the story, the son, is just enormously sympathetic. Feels like somebody that in real life, and even the
got a crush on the girl who at the next, his best friend's sister. He's got a big crush on her. It is a very relatable character. It's very much does seem very much set in the real world. They're going to a cabin out by the lake. There's woods around. He's looking at bicycles, talking about girls and stuff. He does seem maybe a little bit isolated with his parents, but it's a very relatable character. There's nothing unusual about that. But his mom is just a very strange person. The kind of frankness or the jokes that she says, not only just the games that she's playing with him to try to spook, we think just to try to scare him. Maybe she's a bit of an imp as a mom, but then there's a kind of a sexual frankness about her and her relationship with his dad that is, I think most people would probably find weird or awkward, uncomfortable.
Well, honestly, it feels a little bit like a John Cheever story. There's a lot of murky undercurrents in terms of the parental relationship, in terms of what the stakes of the story, might be. I have not thought about it, in terms of relationship to John Cheever, but it feels a little bit like John Cheever. It feels a little bit like Peter Straub, just that there's a lot of stuff going on, which, it's also a coming of age story. It's a story in which the son is maybe being inducted into a kind of rite, but also he is finally coming to understand some things about his family that have been not necessary for him to understand before. Yeah.
There is this whole, you get the perspective of this boy, Jack, who's like maybe 13 or something. He's a, mature kid. And he's like tired of like hearing his parents having sex in the room next door or whatever. He's kind of at that age where that can, as a teenager, and oh, mom and dad, please stop acting like this. Or he walks in on his dad, and his dad's, there are masks all around the cabin, inside the cabin and outside the cabin. And he walks in on his dad wearing a mask. He's butt naked, and he is in a room. He walks on his dad, and he's just wearing a mask. And it's just very weird. The dad's also very quiet. The mom's doing all
kind of
the
blank.
talking.
Yeah,
he is. He is a blank.
Yeah,
it's very strange. So he's experiencing weird things, but the story never explains outright. Or I've seen a couple of theories online of what they think is happening, but we're never really told what's going on between the mom and the dad, what the expectation is between the mom and her son Jack. Who are these two children who are out in the woods, and another kid who's like dressed in like a nightgown, riding a bicycle that would have been built like designed 100 years ago,
like the back of a playing card.
Yes, exactly. And then she keeps bringing up the playing card people. We've got to be careful; they're going to find, etc. But we're never told that, and we're left in this sort of liminal space, I guess, where we follow his experience, but it's never clearly explained. And there's a great, I guess that's kind of the definition of the weird. You're experiencing something that never gets explained or is inexplicable. I suppose that Joe Hill could have given us the entire backstory and said, hey, here's in the end, like, let's now go and reveal everything that you want to know about these, about these characters, which will kind of ruin the terrifying nature of the story. But it's, I guess that decision of how much to reveal is really important.
To sort of talk about the sort of spectrum of writers where the pleasure is giving you the deep lore, as opposed to the writers who sort of gesture at sort of, great mysteries with capital G and capital M. I feel like if this were a Laird Barron story, you would get a lot of really great lore, and sort of it would be horrifying. You would understand sort of the cost of the bargain that this family seems the mother appears to be trying to remake, and it would be great. And in the Joe Hill story, what you get is a lot of numinousness and a sense that there's a lot of really arcane ritual and bargains being made. But you're not in on it. You are in on it as much as this kid is. And I like both those kinds of stories. I am all for the story in which you're experiencing something the way that somebody is who's a bit player, until the moment when suddenly they have a major role thrust upon them. And the story that you are getting is sort of that moment of transformation where they, whether they want to or not, are being moved into the heart of the story.
That's something about too. Most of the stories we're talking about, the main character is a child or a teenager. They're right at that point of adolescence, and so there's a lot of coming of age stories here. And I guess there's something about that particular part of a human's experience and human's journey of adolescence and going into a world that their parents have to some degree protected them from, or tried to explain and prepare them for, or had neglected to do so. But it's a time of such change and turmoil that there's just a natural deep well of horror that can be, or experience that can be drawn on to turn into a horror story.
Yeah, and to sort of touch briefly on a Joe Hill story that I love in that same collection, which is not a coming of age story, Best New Horror, which ends with this, really sublime moment in which the editor of this anthology is sort of running at top speed away from somebody who is trying to kill him. But he's thinking, well, if anybody's equipped, to understand this and get out of it, it's me. And that sort of shift from the sort of coming of age story where you think, this is all really weird and I don't understand any of it, this is the first time this has happened to me, to that protagonist in Best New Horror who has been around for a while and knows all the ins and the outs and is almost delighted to sort of be in a situation that he did not expect to be in. One of the things that I love about collections is the juxtaposition of these different kinds of experience from different points in characters' lives.
What do you make of the specifically in the story, the masks? It's titled "My Father's Mask." The boy's father, who's wearing a mask through most, and once he's in the cabin, he's wearing a mask the whole time. The boy's father's not the villain. If there is a villain, I suppose you could say the mom's a villain, or at least something threatening is going on. She doesn't harm her son, though.
No.
There's an appraiser, some mysterious person named an appraiser, who looks like they're summing up appraising the value not of the cabin that belonged to the grandfather they've lost recently, but seems to be appraising the value of the father. Like there's some deal going on there.
Yeah.
And the son takes up the mask and maybe is going to be the next in line to be appraised or something. I mean, it's very mysterious. But in particular, is the mask part of the reason you think it might be related to Greek, like an echo of
the
a
mask?
Greek?
I think the mask is one of the things that signals that this is kind of a ritual, that the person doesn't matter as much as the role that the person has either agreed to take on or has been given is the thing that matters. That it and the mother doesn't seem evil to me. It seems like she is wheeling and dealing, to sort of protect what she can, and has more or less given up, a husband whom she seems to love, because she can only save so much.
And the father's not warning the boy. Well, he warns the boy, but he's not trying to stop the boy from he's not trying to stop from being sold off or whatever it is that's going to happen to the dad. And he just has more of a wistful, forlorn, regretful kind of air to him, and kind of wants to warn the boy of something, but doesn't even know what to say. Maybe.
Yeah.
The fact that these things are not explained, I think it probably is more powerful than if they were all explained. But it's in particular because it's the main character is such a young person.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the next story is The Time Remaining by Attila Veres. I hope I'm getting that name right.
I don't know, but it is. He's so good.
Yes. This collection, The Black Maybe, is one of the just a really a lauded collection, recent collection. And as we start off talking about this story, I want to just bring in Muffet, my Battlestar Galactica robot dog from when I was about 7 years old. And he's going to he's just going to stay here with me because this is one of the most demented stories I've ever read. Well, this is basically Toy Story, the final chapter, I've decided. In this story, there's a boy. He is given a something called Villy by his grandmother. We don't know what Villy is. We do know at the very beginning, Villy is in the process of dying. But we're not even told what Villy is for a couple of pages in. But what do we need to know about the story, The Time Remaining?
Well, it's a story being told in recollection, so this is a person who doesn't tell you a ton about where they are in their life now. And so I feel that when you go into it, it feels safe in a way. Any story that begins with a narrator who says, well, when I was a kid, this happened. You think, oh, well, they're still fine then.
He's made it into adulthood or whatever, wherever he is.
There may have been something traumatic, but even the fact of telling is in some way reassuring. And so the grandmother gives him Villy. The mother and the grandmother have a somewhat strange relationship. And then in the narrator's friend group, these children, it's almost the idea of social contagion through imaginative play. That there is a decision made that toys can die, which is the parents, right? Somebody wants to sort of get rid of somebody's old toy, but the children begin to make sort of and I hesitate to say game, but sort of a series of logical leaps. Well, if toys can die, then maybe my toy can die too.
Yeah.
and begin to observe signs of sort of mortality in their toys, which they're attempting to fend off unsuccessfully. Toys sort of get sicker.
An eye falls off, or a little seam opens and some stuffing comes out, like the things that normal wear and tear of most kids' toys.
Yeah.
Including, in this case, Villy, who we find out is a plushy toy of some sort of bear or something.
Yeah.
But they seem to get, it's like a disease. And this kid, the main character, the narrator, finds other kids whose toys seem to be dying. And they start doing things to try to save their toys. And it just the story goes off the rails. It becomes horrific. And it's, again, like, I have a number of my teddy bear that my grandfather gave me when I was 4 years old was in the garage. I couldn't find him, but his name is Corey.
Oh yeah, no, I've got toys that I had as a kid. I have a cat which I loved so much. The cat took baths with me. It lost all of its fur. It had to. It became threadbare, and pieces began leaking out as the.
So in this story, which is like Poe with flourishes of Thomas Ligotti, the kid is so attached to Villy, his stuffed animal, which he still does associate with his beloved grandmother. His grandmother, we find out, was actually dying, and the boy's mom didn't want the boy to be just emotional and torn up over it. He's got to be tough. He's got to be a man, grow up to be a man. So don't get too sentimental about people dying, about things that you love and are attached. Don't get too attached to it. Yeah. So she tells him, like, that Villy's dying. Villy's sick and he's going to die, and you don't have that much longer to live with him. But he can't, to try to toughen him up. Again, like not a very warm, loving mom. Yeah. Yeah. But he starts. He and his friends start looking for ways to protect, to lengthen the animals' lives by
monitoring their toys to make sure that. But it really does. It feels like death is sort of this contagion, which spills from the grandmother to Villy to the other toys. And one of the things I really admire as a writer about the story is. At that point in the story, you think, oh, well, the grandmother has died. And so as a kid, of course, he associates the toy in some way. And if grandmothers can die, then toys can die too. And then it just gets stranger.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It moves out of that space of psychological sort of sympathetic thinking into the uncanny.
The one of the quotes I just love here, Villy's falling apart. His eyes have fallen out. So the boy puts red tape on his eyes as X's. And as much as he loves and wants to prolong the life of Villy, the longer this goes, the more horrifying the situation gets. He says, I was scared to stay alone in my room, especially after I woke up one night to the gaze of Villy's red X eyes. Villy was lying on my pillow, staring right at me, even though at night I would always make a warm, cozy nest for him on the floor. In the first place, to protect him from potential bedwetting, and secondly, because I could barely stand his smell anymore. He smelled of death, and I would choke from it at night. My eyes! Villy shouted at me, where are my eyes? And then eventually they start cannibalizing other stuffed animals to take their stuffing and their parts and try to kind of like do these fluff fusions into Villy and his friends and their other very special stuffed animals. And it really gets wildly absurd and hysterical, but it keeps the hysterical nature and the horrific nature completely together. And you still, as wild as it gets, I still feel like I get why the kid is so attached, because I still have some of my stuffed animals from 50 years ago. By the end of this story, I think he realizes he's got to put Villy out of his Villy is kind of he can hear Villy's voice in his head. Yeah. He has to utter like out loud Villy's death pangs, and Villy's just like, why are you keeping me alive? And it just gets so crazy. But at the end, when Billy finally he decides I'm gonna have to kill, and he cuts Billy all apart, and he hears in his mind Billy's death screams, but then he's done with it. He puts it away, and he goes on to for some amount of time. Maybe he's like an older teenager now. I don't know. I don't know if it's like a few months or a few years. What do you make of the end, though? He goes downstairs one day, and he finds his mom falling apart and stuffing coming out of the seams in her body.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
And then the head sort of topples off. I think I assumed that he was at least a teenager now. You know, that a fair amount of time has passed. And I think that well, I'll just say that one of the things that working with young protagonists opens up is this space in which the imagination, one is able to imagine all sorts of things, but also to take very practical actions, you know, to sort of prevent the bad stuff. I mean, think about all the stuff that I did, maybe you did as well as a kid, you know, to protect against monsters, you know, the people who sleep with their whole body covered over, the people who sleep with the light because the light will keep the monster away.
With the covers over the head.
I think that I covered my entire head except for an ear so that I could hear something.
Nice.
But again, you know, that's in that story. They're all, well, what if we tried this? You know, this sort of almost scientific approach to a fantastic situation. You know, the toys are dying. How can we stop this? Well, what if we did? And sort of echoes the way that kids play doctor, stuff like that. And then I think that when you are in the place in that story, the protagonist is now older, and there's that reversal in which suddenly the toys aren't mortal in the way that people are, but suddenly the person, you know, your mother is mortal, specifically in the way that a toy is, that they begin to leak stuffing, that they are coming apart at the seams. And I think it's also the economy of that scene. So you have this very, very long sort of section of the story. You know, what do we do to keep a toy alive? And then in that last paragraph, I think because of all the work that he's done to sort of make this feel real, or at least psychologically real, to move very swiftly in that space in the kitchen where suddenly the mother's head falls off. I think when I read that, I just sort of, my head didn't fall off, but it felt like it did a little bit. What has just happened in a way that I very rarely feel with stories? It was just so incredibly surprising and satisfying at the same time that I could not tell you the logic, but it felt as if the story had earned it.
It justifies his terrified emotional response that his toy might die. Well, and the mom, who's the whole time is like, you've got to toughen up, you know, she really doesn't want to allow him to experience the horror and the sadness of losing a stuffed animal or his grandmother, her mom. And at the end, she is, just a toy herself. I guess maybe it's, I think of it thematically as we never grow out of this, our insane fixation of resisting death. I mean, it's bizarre, it's weird, but it's within the realm of possibility until you get to the mom, and she's a toy. So now we're suddenly again like into the Legati space where
very much the Legati space. And you know, one of the things that I love is that also it moves you out of that sort of place of safety where it feels like a club story. You're being told a story about someone's childhood. All of a sudden you are moved into a space that feels much closer, in part because you can't imagine what happens after that. You know, that you've moved out of the space in which real things happen, which is often true of a Legati story, that you move farther and farther and farther away from the real world and the rules of the real world, and suddenly you're in a space where you don't have that safety anymore.
That's right. Let's jump. You mentioned the power of working with young protagonists. The Specialist had, of course, there are twin girls who are the main characters. I don't know if they're the narrators of the story. I think they are.
Yeah, they're maybe the closest thing.
Yeah. Do you have a quick recap of this story, because it is a challenging one to try to recap? There's a lot going on and a lot that's left unsaid.
Yeah, there are twin sisters. Their mother has died. Their father is a scholar. They are staying in a house where that once belonged to a poet who wrote a great deal of poetry, which is much of which is probably not very good. And their father, when the story opens, they are being babysat. Their father has met somebody that you don't meet yourself, who may be a little dangerous or sort of part of a sort of a panoply of suspicious characters. And so they're being babysat by someone who also appears to be maybe a little bit uncanny, who is playing a game with them, a game in which they play dead. And, you know, the house that they're in appears to be a house that is full of different kinds of ghosts. I was drawing on the Wakefield story, The Red Lodge, which is a classic horror story about a family who goes and stays in a house which is just absolutely overrun with ghosts. There's a ghost in the river. There's, you know, rooms which have different kind of ghosts in them. Not a great place to stay, especially with a family. And the father sort of comes home at the end. The babysitter sort of suggests that he has been changed in some way. And in order to escape him, the children are sort of entering into this mode, which is somewhere in between really being dead and the game that they've been playing, of being sort of dead with a capital D, and are sort of fleeing from him. I don't know if that's a great explanation or not.
No, it captures a whole heck of a lot of it. Overall, you get the perspective of the girls, whether they're narrating this from some future point or not. I don't think you could say concretely. I can't anyway as a reader. But you're definitely getting their experience, and there are a number of things happening around them that, because I think primarily because of their age, but also because of the uncanny nature of what these things appear to be, you really don't understand in concrete detail all the things that are happening. It seems like there's this poet who used to live here, and some of his poetry is still extant, and we get little snippets of it. There's this the poem "The Specialist's Hat," which is, the specialist's hat sounds like and then a set of exotic birds and other animals, and that's his most famous poem, we're told.
Which he has stolen.
Which he may have stolen from a man from Mulatapu, in Panama, I think that is. So yeah, and there's like we're trying to follow the specialist, the babysitter, who's wearing out clothes that seem a bit dated, like they would maybe be from a very old-fashioned kind of outfit, and she's playing this game with them about kind of watch out for the specialist, hide from the specialist. If you ride the bike in the attic around fast enough, you can escape the specialist. But there's all and then the dad, this woman that he is meeting out in the woods, he's met somebody, and there's some indication that a woman, maybe the poet Charles Cheatham Rash's wife or something, was turned into some kind of a snake monster of some kind. And there are just little hints and indications that the woman that he's meeting might actually, that the woman their dad is meeting might actually be this woman. But I feel like, in terms of like the story technique, there's the girl's experience, and then there's all the things that are happening, and that gap in between there is like the kind of the zone of disarmament. It's that uncanny space there where we're trying to fill in the gaps as readers. It's like, I guess, Scott McCloud and his in his book Understanding Comics talks about panels, and then there's the gutter between the two comic panels. Panel one is one man's running after another man with an axe. Then there's that white gutter space. The next panel is the cityscape with the letters ah. And well, what happened in between there? We make up we have to make that up. Guy chopped him in the head with an axe. You're making our imaginations work a lot to try to piece together what's going on in this story. So I guess that's kind of part of that, that technique there that you're using that's so effective. And that's similar, I think, what Joe Hill was doing with My Father's Mask.
And I love that you brought up Scott McCloud, because that book was great for me in terms of understanding different kinds of effects that different kinds of representation or gaps create in terms of how a reader navigates a story and understands a story. And to go to the question of point of view or narrator, you are getting stuff from the girl's point of view, but you are at a certain remove. And that is in part because I think that remove creates the kind of thing that Scott McCloud talks about. If you are deep in someone's interiority, there's a certain kind of warmth or a certain kind of feeling that you are in company. And with that story, I wanted more of a remove. And I wanted it to feel as if you were getting that you are somewhat outside the zone that the two girls exist in with each other. That the information that you mostly get is to make it clear that they are each other's company, that they have each other. But the reader is not quite in that same space with them. You're getting bits of sort of their experience.
This is pretty close to the beginning of the story. You're getting really close, like third person, but really close. You're like right at the elbow of these girls, Claire and Samantha, and they're having some conversation about like playing the game of when you're dead, and when you're dead, it's always cold and damp, but you have to be very quiet, or else the specialist will get you. The babysitter says. The house is haunted, Claire says. I know it is, the babysitter says. I used to live here. And then there's a quatrain. Something is creeping up the stairs. Something is standing outside the door. Something is sobbing in the dark. Something is sighing across the floor. And then it just goes on to kind of continues on with some narration about Claire and Samantha. And there are these just little snippets that are thrown in here. Like, I don't know who's narrating that. And it may be that, no, it's no one narrating. It's Kelly Link adding in a little section of that story.
They're a little bit of a collage technique because there is another character at the center of the story, this poet. It seemed like rather than giving his point of view, giving pieces of his poetry would be a way of telling, I guess, the reader something about maybe his experience as well as kind of his voice.
Yes. Even having his, I think you make a note in here that as a little bit is described, the girl's father is doing research on this poet here at this house called Eight Chimneys, and it simply notes that he had a lot of bad obscure poetry and an even worse and more obscure novel, The One Who Was Watching Me Through the Window. And a little bit later, you see that someone's watching them through a window, and it's you're starting like the two different eras that are 100 years apart or whatever, or just starting to fold together as you realize like that these things that are in the past that are ghosts are not gone at all. And
I think the poems, I think this is not language that I had sort of before thinking about this through the lens of Scott McCloud, but they're gutters. They sort of pull you out of the girl's point of view, and for me are a way of creating a little bit more distance, but also reframing what's happening.
Yes.
I think they work the way that the gutters might in panels.
I love that. There is one other thing about the story. The numbers, the place that numbers have in this is there. I know that in the rules for playing the dead game, numbers are significant, and they keep track of a lot of numbers. I mean, it's like how many days since their mom died, how many days old, years, days, hours old they are. And then there's also, of course, the poetry and the meter and the rhythm of the poetry. I just wondered if that had something, if maybe the importance of numbers is some sort of a clue, or has something to do with maybe the place of meter in the poetry and the stories. Is that just texture that you apply to it, or is there some like secret clue in there?
What was that? No, it was a starting place for the story for me. That I don't in any way have any sort of synesthesia, but my experience of being in school was that I was interested in math, but I was also very bad in it, and that numbers very much felt as if they had personalities.
Yeah.
And so for me, as a way to sort of approach the characters, I thought I've been teaching a workshop at Smith, which is the college, which is down the street from us. And, somebody asked about how do you come up with characters? And I ended up sort of coming back a week later and saying, well, I think part of it is, do you think, well, what do I have in common with this character? What is the thing that this character would do that I would also do? And then you think, what are the things that this character would do or would think that I would not? And you sort of build character that way.
Interesting.
And so one of the starting places for me with the twins was, maybe they would, like me, really begin to assign personalities to numbers. How are they not like me? Well, they are twins. They have this very intense relationship, and they have these other things that are not mine. But it's a way of negotiating, sort of the dimensionality of this person that you're having to make up. What are the points of commonality? What are the points where you're very, very far apart?
Sibling relationships really play an important part in a lot of your fiction, I've noticed, between the Book of Love, Laura and Samantha, Susanna, Laura and Susanna. Really, I think your earliest, your first story, Dreaming January, published in your college literary journal. I think from the very beginning we see the importance of sibling relationships. The Game of Smash and Recovery. Here in The Specialist Hat, and many of her stories really have that close kind of the dynamic tension between close siblings.
Yeah, I'm one of 3 kids. I was very close in age to my sister, and we fought like cats and dogs, all the time that I was at home. And then once I went to college, we began to become friends, which my dad had sort of said, well, you'll like each other better once you're not sharing a house. And it felt kind of like a magic trick when that turned out to be true, although he also had a sibling and is a psychologist. So I'm sure that he was speaking from a place of sort of professional and personal perspective. But I think that when I read fiction, and this is true, reading submissions or reading unpublished work, that I often feel stories can feel thin to me if there's no sense of the family space that somebody exists in. If somebody, we don't have a sense of who they are at work, if we don't have a sense of what kind of relationship they have with friends. And I think that's because people are often a different person within their family, in their workplace, with the people that they choose to be with. And that if in a story I have some sense of the interesting contradictions about that person who, as they're in those different spaces, if that's not present there, it feels like an opportunity has been missed. And I think that, this is this is why advice columns are always so fascinating to read. They're about the relationships that people have with other people, usually their family members.
Yes.
And there's so much narrative in those letters to advice columnists, and there's so much narrative which begins in the places of family.
Yes. Yes.
That and the way in which you are tied to people, whether or not you want to be, is sort of just great narrative space to explore.
I wonder, jumping over to, and thank you for talking to us about the Specialist Hat, which is an incredibly powerful and special and really disarmingly frightening story. Mm-hmm. We're really trying to piece together what is happening throughout the entire story. And then even at the end, there are real questions. Who is the specialist? What is this hat? I'm pretty sure it's not really a hat. Got my Specialist hat up here, by the way. My wife, Shelley, made. I love it. Thank you for trying it on when I met you in Atlanta. That was a thrill. But you mentioned, the family you're raised with, the people you had no choice over it. Your parents just made you, and here's your family. But also place, the places, where you grew up. Now, I grew up in St. Augustine, Florida, a fellow Florida native. I think you grew up in Miami, as I understand. I imagine growing up especially in Miami. It's Florida, but no, it's Miami. Yeah. I'm sure that left its imprints on you, just like growing up in St. Augustine left it on me. And here in the White Road, I mean, the sense of place and what has happened to these places is so palpable. I love that it's set in Tennessee. I've been in Tennessee for 30 plus years now, and we actually end up in Nashville. I just love seeing that. But there's something about the places that they're going to and what has happened to them that is fascinating. This is from your book, White Cat, Black Dog, which is based on stories that were that have as their springboard fairy tales. This was a fairy tale I wasn't familiar with, the Musicians of Bremen. What was it about that fairy tale that got its hooks into you, that served as a springboard for this incredibly eerie and I think really frightening story?
I would not say that I love the original fairy tale, but it's one that I have thought about a great deal. That it's almost a it's almost literally a Shaggy Dog story. It's about a group of animals who wish to make music. There's the donkey, there's the rooster, the dog, but they make this sort of cacophony instead. And eventually they end up scaring off robbers by making these terrible noises. And I cannot tell you why that story has stuck with me. But I think one of the things that I did like about it in terms of the framework of the collection was it's absolutely emblematic of a certain kind of fairy tale, the kind of fairy tale which is almost like a Shaggy Dog joke. And it was nice to have something where I was pulling from that strand of the fairy tale tradition. And this, the White Road began in part because I often with a story, I have a scene in mind, and the scene that I had in mind was a group of actors who are rehearsing for a play. And one of them is lying, playing dead on the set or on the stage during the rehearsal, an all-night rehearsal. And this leads to sort of a confession of love. And for a while, I could not figure out the story that this was taking place in. But I had a workshop to go to, a workshop that I've gone to off and on for several decades, Sycamore Hill, and I needed to write a story for that. And that voice, the voice of the protagonist, was sort of the second thing that came to me. And then the third thing that came to me was this idea of kind of these cataclysmic monsters, which can only be warded off by by sort of a human corpse, or by the idea of
Where
grief.
did that come from? It's so creepy. I just love it.
I don't know. It was something that felt really transgressive in a way that that felt like it had a lot of narrative energy to it. And the setting came because, as well as Florida, I was a kid in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and spent a lot of time on the mountains, and sort of the really that in that landscape. And I could imagine this group delivering mail, sort of moving from space to space in this terrain.
Something magical has happened. We are wearing different clothes. Malo Mog must be out and about doing her impish thing.
I almost put on the same clothes again for this, but I thought it might be a little weird.
I thought about doing that too, but no, it's all good. It had a little bit of an internet problem, so we are back for the second part of this. I think the story, one of the things that I find so charming and so very eerie about it is it shows the power of the reveal. Here, we know early on there's something unusual about it, and then we find out that these people who are traveling on horseback are you could assume it's maybe the 19th century or something until you see the word suburb shows up, and then a little bit later you see that there's an interstate travel stop, and you realize like this looks like there are things that are contemporary, but they're not living like contemporary folks, and you get in further and find out there's this wonderful, shocking reveal of a corpse that's time is about expired in an inn where they're stopping, and you realize, man, something very, very strange is going on here. But these things that travel or traverse the White Road, we're never told what they are. We're kind of left to assume that, maybe they're aliens or demons or the evolved humans of the far-flung future who've come back through time travel, etc., without asking for you to say what it is. Do you know what they are? And is it important that you know what they are as a writer?
I think it is important to me to have a sense of what my characters might know or speculate, and what feels taboo for them to talk about. That there is a that narrator, the narrator of the story, really came through strongly at the start in such a way that I was able to write it very quickly, which was good because I was taking it for a workshop and was on deadline. But once I had a sense of his voice, his sort of reluctance or circumspection to talk too directly about some really big things, I had a through line for this story. And I think from writing the story, my sense was I needed to know what these characters were willing to speculate about, what they weren't. And in that way, I think that they felt the whole cast of characters in the story felt contemporary to me, in the sense that there were concerns or dangers pressing in on them, which were not things that they like to talk about. In terms of my perspective outside of the characters, I think those monsters, whatever's on the White Road, I did think of them as monsters, and it felt as close to Lovecraft as I tend to get.
Interesting. Yeah, I can totally see that. Their perception of the White Road shifts. It kind of jumps around. Like you look one direction, there it is. You look back, it's gone. Oh, it was on the other side of me. So it's definitely something that's kind of there's an interdimensionality to it, I guess. That they really don't know what this thing is. They don't understand its nature. They do have some speculation about it,
and some speculation about what might keep them safe. I think that there are Lovecraft stories like The Color Out of Space, which are enormously effective to me as a reader, because you don't have a lot of information. I mean, in that story, that there's been a a meteor, that it's probably carrying a otherworldly fungus or something. But, that's sort of lightly sketched in at the beginning. And, the White Road is very much a story about a lot of people carrying a lot of trauma. And not wanting to talk about it.
Yes. And that seems like, the setting here is this kind of the rapidly decayed remains of this post-apocalyptic world where everyone's scrabbling to survive with this nightmarish shadow over their shoulders of the White Road. But then the nature of the White Road really isn't the focus. The story really is about the lives and loves of this troupe of performers. Like the narrator in particular, we find out later as they're heading to Bremen, one of the next stops on the trip there, he has a woman there who he is in love with, named Meredith. And when we get to the climactic scene and the walkers on the White Road appear, he so longs to see her that he actually lingers in the presence of a couple of these monsters because they appear to us as people that we know or knew in the past. And he's hoping just to get a glimpse of Meredith, not her. It would be a monster impersonating her, but he just wants to see her so badly that he'll actually endanger his life to get a chance to see her again. So it really is like about the love that people still carry around with them, or at least that's how it seems to me.
I very much think it's a story about the relationships and the sort of about as you say, the lives and the loves of the people in the story. And one of the pleasures of writing that story, aside from the fact that the voice came very naturally, was it was, I don't want to say that it was fun because I'm not sure it's a fun story, but it was a great deal of fun to sort of sketch in a group of people whose circumstances are pretty risky, but who have a lot of affection for each other.
Yes. Did you ever do theater? I mentioned earlier that I've been involved in theater really since kindergarten. There really is a sense of that kind of that theatrical troupe and especially the overlapping romantic relationships, romances, and affairs and things. Did you ever do theater?
I went to a summer camp where they would put on a big musical every year, and I was never anything more than an extra. But I think what I love about theater is the way that there are all these invisible jobs. There's the set design, there's the people who are helping backstage, who are doing essential work backstage. And then there is the fact that you have a group of people who all have their personalities, often very strong personalities, and they are playing someone who may not at all be like themselves. And that just seems enormously rich in terms of storytelling potential. And I think prior to writing that story, I had been writing an introduction to Robertson Davies' novel. And there's a lot in Robertson Davies about theater and about people who are actors or people who are putting on productions. And I may have been drawing on that as well.
Yes. Another parallel that I noticed, just having finished the Book of Love, your new novel, is here we have 4 teenagers. They're older teens. They're 18, 19 years old, just graduated high school, I think. And they have been granted magical powers, and yet their lives are still completely absorbed in their relationships. Lovers or beloveds, to their parents, to their siblings. That really, rather than say, let's say I think about it like a post-apocalyptic scenario that might be like The White Road would be the Tom Cruise movie, The Edge of Tomorrow, where like there's a bizarre scenario going on. He keeps, he gets in a battle and he dies. He keeps waking back up the next morning.
Yeah, that's a super fun movie.
It is. It's super fun. It's action oriented. It's really, and you, by the end of it, you get an explanation of essentially what's going on. And they spend the whole movie figuring out how to take it on, how to fix it. The White Road is not that kind of story. It focuses on the human dimension, the human aspects of yet people carrying trauma. People still like surviving is not enough. You still have to live, I guess, is kind of the idea. And then Book of Love does that same thing here. Even under, like, they have a sense that they're under a real threat. Like they may die, play a game or die and maybe still die, but they're still just absorbed with their relationships with people. That just seems like a space that you work in a lot.
Yes, I think I am always interested not just in the plot and in the world building, but I think the things that I'm most interested in are structure and looking at the intersection between someone's life and the extraordinary things that are going on around them.
Yeah.
And fantasy, horror, coming of age stories, all of those offer a lot of narrative space to the question of what matters to you in your life, even as things are going horribly wrong.
There's one other thing in The White Road that just sticks out, and I don't know what to do with it. I'm not sure how to interpret it or if it's really a big deal. But the very opening paragraphs, it's this story is being framed as a story. The narrator is looking back after all of the, late in his life. He's looking back at a particular situation that happened in this post-apocalyptic world. But just to read a couple of paragraphs quickly, he writes at the very beginning, all of this happened a very long time ago. And so I suppose it has taken on the shape of a story, a made up thing, rather than true things that happened to me and to those around me. Things I did and that others did. And so I will write it down that way as a story. The world is different now from the way it was. This is a story everyone knows. And so it is not the story I will tell. Who I was before, that too is a small story, so small I could fit it into a box that would fit into another box. That box still small enough to carry inside the smallest pocket. Were I to take it out of its box, I do not know that I could ever fit it back inside again. And there are a couple of other places where he just mentions, but that's not the story I'm telling. Let me get back to the story. I wonder, does that idea of framing the story that this man is telling, looking back on, is that in some way reflective of their phenomena of experiencing the terror of the White Road, or perhaps on what aspects of the human experience make it into our fairy tales? Is it maybe a warning on the dangers of love and desire, that kind of thing that would go into a fairy tale? Or am I reading too much into that maybe?
I think that part of it is that this is a narrator who has lived through sort of this progression of pretty astonishing things. This is a guy who, from a certain point in his life, so many things have happened that, in fact, he could tell a lot of different stories. And I think that to begin to unpack them would undo the way that he has sort of made himself into a person that can keep on going.
Oh, wow.
And I think I'm also interested in the relationship that people have with their lives, and then the way that they frame their lives when they tell other people. Yeah. And because he is somebody whose work for a long time was taking narratives, made up narratives and bringing those to life. I think he has thought a fair amount about structure, about how we make stories out of true things, and what matters in those stories. And I think he also very much knows that how you tell a story helps define how someone is going to take it in.
Interesting.
That he is aware that to tell a story is in a sense a performance.
Yes.
And so I liked the idea that he, in terms of being the protagonist, being the narrator, that he was going to kind of self-consciously set himself as sort of the container of the story, and also the person who is, much like many other aspects of that story, he was going to straight out tell you that there were certain things that he was not going to tell you.
Yes. It's interesting you think of that kind of compartmentalization as a way to be able to grapple with, analyze, deal with, even the episodes, the continuum of your own life. There's a kind of a public theologian / cultural commentator named David Dark. It lives here in Nashville, and he explained, he once used this phrase. He talked about Alan Moore's The Swamp Thing series, that comic book series, saying that he couldn't explain himself to himself without the Swamp Thing being part of it, because that was so important to him as a teenager. He also described this idea of he connected Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and the Land of Make-Believe with the Ari Aster film Hereditary. Because in the Land of Make-Believe, we miniaturize our lives, we miniaturize our problems, so we can kind of step back and look at them. In the same way that Toni Collette's character, the mother in Hereditary, is miniaturizing her entire life. In fact, his theory is none of the stuff that we see in the movie is actually happening. She's kind of imagining all of this, and it's her way of processing the difficult feelings that she has as a mom, like sometimes not wanting to be a mom, maybe really being disappointed with her kids in various ways, and disappointed her life's turned out a certain way, and like you can't betray your children like that. Well, she's maybe imagining all of these things happening, but that idea of being able to miniaturize, compartmentalize parts of your life to be able to simply grapple with them, and we experienced that early on with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I just thought that was really fascinating.
It's interesting. I would argue in Hereditary that it's not only that she is miniaturizing, but she is making it into art. That there's and I do agree. I think that there is something valuable in terms of taking a story literally in that movie into your hands and remaking it in some way. But she is also claiming it as not just her life, but as art.
Yes.
And she's taking a very feminized occupation, dollhouse, making miniatures, and she's claiming that as art as well.
Yeah, there's one last thing that the White Road brings to mind. You've got this traveling troupe performing plays and songs. They're providing entertainment. He describes as entertainment to a decimated world. I read fiction. You write fiction. I take joy at fiction. I even glee when a new, Laird, Barron, or Stephen Graham Jones story comes out. And we do these things while the world is burning around us. Mm-hmm. I wonder if sometimes I just wonder, how can I justify taking joy, such lighthearted joy even, when there's just so many terrible things going on around us. I don't know. I don't know if you ever struggle with that sense.
I'm thinking about that, and I agree, both as a reader and also as a writer, that I have complicated feelings about the things, anything that brings me pleasure. Why are we making beautiful meals? Why are we, traveling to places and taking delight in doing that? Why are we not sort of doing work that feels more essential? But then I also think that, I feel as if that there is something, and I don't feel like we have great vocabulary for it. I feel like even saying that something is valuable as opposed to something is unnecessary, that you are already beginning to assign kind of capitalist labels. You're saying, well, what is the merit? What is the value? I don't even really like grades at this point. And I think the question instead is there something here which, is there something in this work that feels human? Is there something here which makes me see the world in a different way? Is there something that makes me feel as if I am taking part in a kind of communion, whether it's with a actual community or with ideas or with a body of literature,
or an author who's been dead for 200 years.
All of that. And I have to hold on to the idea that the things that we think of as frivolous, that there is actually something in there which is an essential part of what makes us who we are, the things that we are interested in. And that doesn't mean, that interest can't become obsessive, or that there isn't a kind of balance which might be good to achieve. But sometimes it almost feels to have an interest, an obsessive interest. Why shouldn't we allow somebody to lean into that? Maybe they are going to find something, that nobody else would have discovered if they hadn't been looking at it.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I guess by way of that point, and thank you, that was beautifully stated. My son, when he turned 11 years old, discovered Rubik's cubes, and within a couple of years, he was going to like national competitions in the U.S. of trying to speed solve Rubik's cubes. And he's fast. He's pretty good. He solved like the classic 3x3 in just like 8 seconds. We just noticed him. I think you mentioned the idea of earlier of not having synesthesia, but having assigned personalities to numbers. When he was a little tiny guy in a crib, he would take the little refrigerator magnet numbers and would have them in his crib, and he'd line them up. He would make them kind of move around the top edges of his little day bed and set them down one by one, and he would have them talk to each other, night, night, red 9, night, night, right. Change a diaper, green 7. Yeah, yellow 2, don't hit green 4, that kind of thing. But he gave them all personalities and stuff. But his whole life, he's been messing with configurations and applying maybe meaning to things that are inanimate or that we wouldn't assign real meaning to. And he's like about to wrap up studying pure mathematics at Vanderbilt. And he's a cancer survivor. He got Hodgkin's lymphoma when he was 19. And he went through chemotherapy, and it almost killed him. It was a very just awful situation, very painful and very frightening. And he really didn't know if he was going to survive. And we didn't know. And now he's doing mathematical modeling on chemotherapy drugs to find ways to make like the very caustic chemo drugs less caustic to like heart tissue and things like that.
Oh, how fantastic.
All of these very strange, this thing that he's got, whatever it is, kind of this Aristotle's idea of the telos. Like, this is a kid who's made to work with configurations. And he's been doing that. And now it's actually maybe and I bring this up to say his weird obsession with shapes, with the doors from Monsters, Inc., the Monsters, Inc. movie. There are doors all over the place. We made hundreds or thousands of little paper doors where he could draw designs on them and then put them on strings in the family room and made the string factory with all the doors on them. He's been obsessed with configurations. And now this mathematics student who doesn't have really much of a background in chemistry is actually going into a chemistry lab and working on, with a postdoc grad, working on creating like a novel sugar that might be used to make better chemotherapies. So his weird little obsessions might actually help improve the human race in some way. That to him is very personal because he's been through cancer. So that yes, I've taught my kids from early on, lean into what fascinates you, and don't be embarrassed or ashamed of that.
And I agree. There's a writer who years and years ago, giving advice to other writers, said, follow your inner rage and your inner perv, which, for me, it's just follow the thing that you are obsessed with, and which makes you feel something. Because I think a lot of people, not just writers, think, oh, well, this is weird. This is not a thing that a person should be interested in. I should move in the space of what other people value. I think some of it is just, why are you interested in that? And you think, oh, I guess I shouldn't be. But at least in my experience with writers, that you begin to do the most interesting work when you discard the question, well, why would anybody care about this? This is something so strange that I'm the only one who cares about that. Instead, it becomes a question of, why am I interested in this thing? What can I do with it? And then maybe the question of, how do I convey my enthusiasm to other people?
Yes. Good. Well, that makes me feel a lot better about buying more books.
Good.
And I'm going to keep doing that, and I'm going to keep enjoying these very strange things I enjoy, because to try to take that away doesn't make me more human, and it's not fixing anything. And yes, find a balance, give to charity, be compassionate. Definitely, try to make the world a better place. But I feel much better about my inclinations toward fiction. Thank you.
And we try and do our best to create space for other people and their interests. That is part of being in a community, is making space for people whose interests and are not your own, but recognizing that there's still delight in those things.
I'll try to stop speaking in such an ugly fashion about golf. I just don't get it, or sports in general. I just don't get it.
I'm okay with discarding golf, actually. It's not very good for the environment.
Yeah. Not a great use of public space, really.
No.
Okay, thank you. That's wonderful. So there was one other, when I asked you about to share with me a couple of stories that are horror tales that really kind of sink their teeth in and leave a mark with you. You mentioned one other author, and that is Livia Llewellyn. And I'm so glad you did, because she is fearless and ferocious, and I don't know why more people aren't talking about her. Why does her work stand out to you? Why did you want to bring Livia into the conversation?
I feel like Livia is part of a cadre of writers who are, some of my favorite writers working in horror today. John Langan, Laird, Barron, that she is part of this group of writers. And I know that they know each other, they've talked, but they have a deep knowledge of the uncanny and horror traditions in horror fiction. And I agree that she is often overlooked. And one of the things that I've always loved about horror is that there is such a lively small press space. But then I can't help but notice that when there is a boom in horror fiction, we've had a boom going on for quite some time now. Mm-hmm. That some of these writers who I think have really been carrying the torch, John, Laird, and Livia, they don't seem to get the benefit of that wave of publicity and money. And I think Livia, like you say, she's pretty fearless. I think that her fiction is pretty transgressive. I think that she sees sort of the potential and sort of the space that is created in writing horror that sex opens up. Mm-hmm. And I think that is not particularly common. That I think there's often in horror the idea that sex is bad or sex is dangerous, but it is kind of left there. And Livia really does investigative work in that space to a point where, as a reader, I am often uncomfortable.
Yes.
In a way that horror does not usually make me uncomfortable. And I have
to tortures her protagonists.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And of course, and if for folks who are interested in Livia, who have not read Livia, just know that a lot of her stories deal with sexual assault, child sexual abuse is in there, and they really, some of the stories are hard to read.
Yeah. And she does not write as often as I wish she did.
Yes.
Datlow has been a champion of her work for a long time. And so I will often come across it in anthologies or year's best roundups. But I do really love her work, and I wish that there were more space for her in the horror genre. And one of the things that I love is she will take material, sexual assault, child abuse, and there is still space in those stories. She sort of moves from damage to rage, to sometimes even to triumph.
Yeah.
That there is a sense of that her protagonists seize their own power, that they come out on top, even in a way that if you read somebody like Jack Ketchum, nobody there who's going through sexual trauma is going to come out in sort of the triumphant way that the characters in Livia's stories do.
That's right. Well, let's go ahead and move into one of the 3 stories that you'd mentioned to me, The Low Dark Edge of Life, which is available to read on Nightmare Magazine's website. It's a fascinating story. The text is comprised of what appear to be journal entries by a 15-year-old young woman named Lilianette Van Hamel. Some of the text is illegible, some of it's missing. There's scholarly annotations around it. This is like a 19th century document is what it appears to be. And it's kind of set in our world, but not exactly. There's some, I think the Lilianette is from New England. She appears, I think she's probably intended to be someone who maybe comes out of Lovecraft's Innsmouth, because she has some ichthyoid features to her, or something's going on. She doesn't look totally human. She's visually impaired, but she can also see kind of a band of reality that's not visible to us. Again, going back to some Lovecraft there. Also, her mom is a kind of a prodigal woman. Her mom is a drug addict and is looked down upon by the rest of the family. And so this young lady, Lilianette, is intended for some higher purpose by her aunt and a troop of a religious order called the Daughters of Isolation. What do you, and it's very much kind of a dark fantasy space, but there are some wonderful embellishments and touches of kind of 19th century Europe as they're heading into Leuven in Belgium, I believe it is. Tell me kind of what sticks with you about this story.
I think the framework of the story, as you say, that these are it's a fragmentary text that from sort of the annotations that there's this kind of exclusion zone that the people can't go into anymore. That so one, I think I love the structure of the story, and two, there's just some imagery in there. I think she says that she can't see in the way that other people do, and one of the markers of that is that she doesn't see faces. She sees instead this sort of swarm, almost a swarm of bees. And then having said that, at different points, it's quite clear that she can make out sort of feelings or sort of expressions in a face. And it's great and it's terrifying. And I haven't seen that before, but she treats it with kind of this aplomb. In fact, everything that happens, much of which is terrible, she just sort of treats in this very matter of fact. She is simmering with rage. Yes. She is determined that she is going to make things go better for her than other people intend. But she also, she just sort of proceeds with great aplomb. Here's what I did. And I love the ending, which again, I think moves you into an unexpected space where she's like, things are good now. I am going to go eat some people. People are going to be really sorry to see me coming, that there were things that I was supposed to be afraid of, but what nobody understood is everyone should be afraid of me.
Yes. She goes through. So, I mean, there's a dark fate awaits her. Yeah. It has been prepared for her by her aunt. She, along with 12 other young woman initiates, are going to be, in some way,
sex cult.
It's a very sex cult. They're going to be chained together with these copies of this occult book, Las Reglas de Ruina, the laws of ruin. They're going to have these books placed on them or maybe inside them. And they are going to become I don't know exactly how to pronounce this word. And I've really looked and I cannot find an online pronunciation, but Wandirachan. It's like a 19th century fishing net that is made of, in part, iron. It kind of hits the bottom and drags across the seabed, and it's destructive, but it's a way to catch, fish and whatever. But they're going to become this Wandrichan for the Ichthian goddess Kasogtha, and the order is going to bring her forth from inside this net of this group of 13 girls chained together. I mean, that's a horrific image. I can't say I've ever seen that before.
No.
And there again, like, so what Lillionette does, they're also virgins. That's important to to this ritual. So Lillionette, I hope it's okay for me to say this. They're totally spoiling this here. Lillionette decides to get rid of her virginity by seducing an ichthyoid creature from the canal next to the building where she's being held, to have sex with her and take her virginity. And it destroys the ritual, and also in some weird way seems to empower her, as it kind of opens up her maybe some sort of a destiny that she has as being a conduit for her goddess, Mother Hydra. I hope I'm getting this right. Again, it's even the text is partial, and it's partially illegible, so we're trying to piece together some of this. But this theme that I see in a lot of Livia's stories is transformation through suffering. But she is absolutely transformed at the end. She will not. She's not going to go along with other people's plans for her. She's not going to give in. And she will even defile her body, at least from the standards of the order. She needs to be a virgin to participate in the ritual. She will defy their will, thumb her nose at them, and no one's going to tell her what to do. It's kind of a scorched earth sort of approach. And yet it completely empowers her to become, well, the center of this exclusion zone. And then she moves on and decides to just live her life, I guess. Man, that's intense.
Yeah, she is an intense writer.
This one passage here, she's Lillionette is writing. I can say with the utmost honesty that there was no difference between the before and after. I remain no more or no less, but only what I am supposed to be. Even with this strange being shuddering inside me, a woman who sees all but is blind. A woman surrounded by all the creatures of the universe, but who is alone. I mean, that to me is like a Byronic hero, one of just these great literary figures. And I'm trying to think of like what's a parallel to like classic literature or anything where you have, especially a female character like this. I don't know of any.
I don't know. I do feel that there are some commonalities between her characters and Laird Barron's characters.
Yes.
In the sense that they are they often have a strong enough sense of self that whether or not they survive, they will take whatever is thrown at them and then immediately think, all right, well then I will do this and do something. And just from the reader's point of view, that kind of character is so satisfying. That any character who takes the worst of something and then has a response that they are then able to attempt to carry out is pretty wonderful. And I think that along with Laird, Livia has a real sense of the ecstatic in the horrific.
Yes,
there are these bursts of numinousness in her stories where she takes and maybe Legati as well, that her area is the grotesque. But she makes it pretty persuasively, if not beautiful, at least worthy of thinking about, or something that you want to sort of try and envision.
Yeah, I wish more of her readers would talk about her because she just needs a larger audience.
I feel that way about her. I feel that way about Gemma Files, and I think one of the writers as well as Lovecraft. That they're drawing on is Tanith Lee.
Yes.
That there's a vein there that runs through Tanith Lee to Livia, to Gemma Files.
That's right. I followed Laird on his Patreon, and he was mentioning just some things he got into, like as a kid in the 70s, and it was like Space 1999 and The Night Stalker, and then like a Tanith Lee paperback. I don't know if it was
Yeah.
a story collection or a novel, but I get the sense I think he says, like, I did not understand everything I was reading. You just know there's something there that is really like transcendent.
I think that there are a lot of writers who owe a debt to Tanith Lee, and the sort of mood that she is able to evoke, even when you don't understand exactly what is everything that's going on.
Yes. And when I read Livia's work, there's a sense of this stuff is dangerous. Like what she's writing is dangerous. I guess that's its transgressive nature. But like, I'm really afraid of what she's going to do to these protagonists of hers. And she, there's like no limit really there. And yet it's not because she hates these characters. I think she identifies with them and how hard the world is. I guess, especially from a woman's perspective. I mean, I don't know if she has any protagonists who are male characters, but boy, she.
That's a good question. I am actually not sure. I definitely think of female protagonists when I think of her stories.
Yeah. But another one of her stories you'd mentioned is called Furnace. This is a very strange story. It really takes a while for you to understand literally what's happening to this character. I don't even know that she's named, but you have like a high school age or middle school age girl who lives with her mom and her grandfather, and everything seems very domestic at first. This just seems like probably a Pacific Northwestern town that is kind of slowly fading away from whatever state of economic glory it had been in a decade or two before. Stores where her mom said, your grandfather used to go, take me down here to go shopping in these stores, and we would buy such and such and whatever, but these stores are now all shuttered, or they can kind of open. Or she starts seeing things that like the young man who runs a particular store, if you look at him closely, there's something about him that kind of looks like he's a mannequin or something. There are elements of the unreal that start to come in early on, but it just gets stranger.
It's a set of vignettes set in a small, economically depressed town, and to me, it's very close to poetry. That it is evocative of a mood, evocative of a feeling. The feeling of coming of age, also the feeling of realizing that a place that you love is changing and decaying. And there is something, it reminds me a little bit of the Stephen King story, Crouch End, in the sense, in Crouch End, where the landscape keeps changing and becoming more uncanny. But Livia's technique is different. This is a story where the protagonist is sort of matter-of-factly relating, or Robert Aikman, very matter-of-factly relating, these people don't quite look like people. Something very strange happened in this store to a bunch of children. So it's as if you're being given here I am with my grandfather, something happens to him, and now here I am with my mother, and something strange is happening. But it doesn't have really what I would call a plot. It's more of a progression of strangeness.
It is. I mean, there is like a point where toward the middle, where you see that her grandfather keeps like stooping over and staring at this map of the town, and he's coloring in parts of different little circles in the town. And what we find out is that that's a place where some child was abducted or disappeared, or another child was abducted from over here. And there's all of these horrific things that don't really seem to fit like part of a normal town life, which is what we get the sense of. It's just like the monotony of growing up and going to school every day. But no, in fact, all over the map, horrific things have happened until you get down to like her home, her little part of town, and it's not colored in. Nothing's happened here, but she keeps remembering her going across the street to head to school and then sinking into the blacktop, and her mom's not coming to get her. Her mom again, like she's not going to win the Mother of the Year award. Her mom seems to be wanting to keep the status quo of the daughter continually, day after day, sinking into the black top to her demise. Again, it is evocative. It's kind of hard to see, like, realistically what's happening here in real world terms, I guess.
Yeah, the girl the protagonist begins to understand that the girl in the black top that she has passed many times, that there are many iterations of her, thousands of iterations of her, and then you know, towards the end of the story, she identifies more and more with the girl in the road. It's unclear if she actually is, or if that's, again, sort of poetic, but I'm not sure that it matters. What matters is she is stuck within the framework of the story.
Yeah. And she finally, I think, faces off with her mother, who seems to be the one who wants to keep her a child. I mean, I think there are echoes of, like, the mother-daughter relationship, and the mother wanting to protect or make her at least follow the rules of society, maybe.
Sure.
Does that sound right?
Absolutely. I think, if you know, the sort of psychological read in this story, you know, that this is a story about the relationship between the mother and the girl, and that it's opaque, but it is clearly not a healthy one.
Right. That's right. It's interesting. I mean, I do think a lot of her Livia's stories are about that parent-child relationship, especially the mother to the daughter. In the case of the Low Dark Edge of Life, it's the mother to the aunt, or it's the child to her aunt, and her mother is kind of a distant figure, and yet one to whom she kind of reaches out to emotionally or spiritually for some form of strength, because her mother didn't fit the expectations of this religious order that their family's been a part of.
She feels both sympathetic towards her mother and also some anger towards her mother. You know, the one of the powerful things about that story is the person that she does have a connection to is this mother who abandoned her, but who she also sees as strong for having refused the role that the family wanted her to take.
Yes. Yeah. And here in Furnace, the mother really just tries to keep her down, but eventually she, refuses that, rejects that, kind of runs away. And, but she can't, she's reliving every day over and over again. And, that's kind of what the sense we get. And that her dropping down into the black top while walking across the school every day, day after day after day, has created some sort of like a large skeleton of that's comprised of the woven together bones of thousands of children. Well, no, in fact, it's her, like, over and over, dropping down to the blacktop again. A very strange, weird, unearthly story here.
Definitely a story in the uncanny mode. You know, it does in the same way that a Robert Aikman story is evocative and disquieting or discomforting, but also there are a lot of Aikman stories where you think, I don't entirely understand what just happened, but it has a feeling of truth about it.
Yes, exactly.
A feeling of revelation, maybe.
Yes, and there's one horrible moment at the very end of it where I think she decides, even if she's escaped her mom, she hasn't escaped, like, life and the world, and she says, this is the very end of the story here. This is my mother's endless suffocating desire, slowing time down around us, winding it back until it becomes the amber-boned river in which I am always and only her little girl, eternal and alone. She has the blue pen that her grandfather used for marking on maps to say, this is what's really going on. Her grandfather knows the truth. And she says, I place the blue pen at the small pale circle of my throat. I can stop time too. So that's how maybe she's going to deal with it. She'll end the cycle by ending her own life. You don't get much more transgressive than that. That's a pretty horrifying ending there.
I am not entirely, just on the practical note, when I read that, I'm not entirely sure that it seems very difficult to kill yourself with a pen. But what you do with a pen is you pin yourself to one place, or you pin a label to a place. And so it can feel like an act of self-harm, but I think it also reads as I'm doing the work that my grandfather did. I am going
Yes.
to mark the place where the bad thing is occurring,
Yes.
which is me.
Yeah. Oh, terrific. Very good. We have one other Livia story. If you have time to talk through this last one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Because this is maybe the Livia story of all Livia stories. The Last Clean Bright Summer, maybe her best known, certainly one of her best known. Do you want to try to give a recap on this one?
This is truly a horrific story,
Yes.
which sort of begins like almost a prototypical story of an adolescent girl going on vacation with her mother and father, which appears also to be sort of a not a corporate retreat, but a thing that the community, a lot of people go to this beach where there is a wall.
And they call it a family reunion.
Yeah.
It's not, it is sort of, I guess.
And and the family, but also appears to be all the people from this specific place. And there's a wall, there's an immense wall there. She appears to have a good relationship with her father, a complicated one with her mother. And it's the voice is very much that of a sort of typical teenage girl. She's sort of looking forward to some things on vacation, and she's lamenting other things. There's a mention of a brother who died, and then
and is buried in the backyard. That's a little sign that something weird is going on here.
Does it say that he's buried in the backyard at the beginning or only at the end?
I think they mentioned that. I'll have to go back and look.
Okay,
I think it's mentioned that he's buried back there along with the dog, the family dog.
All right. Well, there's the great line at the end. Do you think your brother and the dog are the only things buried in the backyard? Just
Yes.
a killer line.
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah. But she is sort of being treated as an adult in some way. She's given a glass of wine. And when she wakes up the next morning, having kind of passed out, she is in a cage on the beach with all of the other girls from this town or this community. They're all in cages, and
they're all naked in cages. Huh? They're all naked in cages with their naked mothers.
Yep. And there is a figure which washes up on the beach, which is an enormous naked woman, a gigantic, like I think you have to picture like a whale, like a dead whale washing up on a beach, and she's obviously and all the fathers and brothers, all the men in the community are standing up on the wall watching. And then her mother says, this is not going to be pleasant, but we have to get through it. We've got work to do. And she does not understand, but her mother hands her some harvesting tools. And as they open up the cages, they begin to run toward the beach, but the figure of the gigantic dead woman, and things are beginning to leap off of her. And these are sort of Lovecraftian
fish frogs is kind of what I think they are.
Fish froggy men, they're male, and they begin dragging the girls down and raping them.
Yeah.
And she is raped, and then her mother sort of is grabbing her up and saying, but now we're going to be harvesting. And they're harvesting these, sort of these things, but there are, her arm is broken. There are dead girls on the beach. And the men up on the wall are all masturbating, she notices. And it turns out that this is a ritual that happens. I don't know that it specifies how often that it happens.
Yeah.
To this community.
And it's happening at various towns on the coast here.
But I think it happens at one at a time, because there's talk of they're going to have to pack up the wall and move the wall to the next community that needs it.
And her dad's an engineer who helped build this wall. And
Yes.
her dad, as gentle and kind as he is with her, he's still he along with all these other men are part of this ritual where they are watching their daughters.
As are the women. And one of the things she learns is that she is not her mother's daughter. That she is sort of she came from, in the same way that they are harvesting these things from the giant corpse, she was harvested too.
Yeah.
And so all of the girls are things that were harvested from this cycle in which this corpse washes up. If they become pregnant, the girls, and if they give birth to boys, they're allowed to keep them. Otherwise, the girls they are given are kind of Lovecraftian sea creatures, which they raise as their daughters. And that is the point where she says, well, what happens if we give birth to a girl? And that's the point where her mother says, oh, do you think your brother and the dog are the only thing that's buried in the backyard?
Yeah.
And then she is horrified and angry, and she's super angry, as she should be. When they get home, she realizes that all of the boys are now interested in her, now that she is pregnant, possibly with the next generation of this weird sort of ritual between the sea and her community.
Earlier in the story, she says, I hope there'll be some interesting boys there. It's all, at the beach when they go on their vacation, it is so very innocent. And now she's found, and yet none of the boys had any interest in her. So it seemed. It was pretty boring. She's kind of lonely. It was pretty boring out there. She just had to hang with her parents the whole time. And now not just the like teenage boys, her own age, but the men as well. They're all looking at her at some party after she's kind of recovered somewhat, her taking the cast off of her arm that had been broken. She has been, inducted into adulthood in this very strange bio-religious sect, and her own mother has betrayed her by bringing her into this ritual, by not telling her what really happens ahead of time. They gave her some wine to knock her out so she wouldn't be aware. They're stripping her and putting her into a cage. But whatever her mother has done, it's not prepared her, and it's not protected her from kind of the horror of this is how we reproduce. The worst image to me is the fathers, the men, the boys all up there on the top of the wall masturbating while this is happening, watching it. It's a spectacle and a pleasure for them. That's just so horrific. And yet this is part of their tradition.
It is one of the most transgressive stories I think I've ever read. But as you say, she writes with enormous sympathy for her protagonists. And there's something triumphant, I think, about the fact that she allows them access to feel betrayed, to feel this kind of burning fury. And I'm glad that we paired this with the low dark edge.
The low dark edge of life.
Because in that story, I think the character, there are some similarities in the sense that this is a rite. And also kind of an encounter with the uncanny, with the numinous, with the monstrous, that there is a kind of betrayal by the older generation. But in the other story, she turns that to triumph.
Yes. And there's a hint here in The Last Clean Bright Summer at the very end. There's a hint that she's going to someday get revenge on these men. Who now turn to her now that she's experienced or whatever. They're now turning to her with interest. Even her dad is looking at her differently, and some kind of sense that she might get back at them in some way. So it leaves the door open for some righteous indignation and righteous wrath to come in.
And she's a great prose stylist. She's got a strong voice. It's the language is sometimes lush or baroque in sort of the way of Tanith Lee, but she's just even when she's writing about really uncomfortable stuff, the writing is still an invitation.
Yes, yes. Last thing about this story, what do you make of the symbol, the giant woman? The giant woman. I mean, she looks like, even though she's clearly like she's out there under the sea, she brings these like eggs of the next generation up with her, and it's a ritual that happens every so often. But she does really look like a human woman.
Yeah.
What do you? But this is just such a bizarre symbol, and this is in a world that, while it feels a lot like our real world, she does have a reference to, you can't go down to Mexico anymore, and it's now called
Right.
Obsidia. Obsidia is like her dark fantasy world. So there are some changes that are going on in the world. It's not quite the world as we see it, but emotionally, it sure feels like, for this young girl, 15-year-old girl, it sure feels like that. But what do you make of the woman as like a symbol? It's just such an odd image.
You know, I do think a lot about the you know, the way that people describe being on a beach and coming across the carcass of a giant squid or whales, and that kind of shock. And so I think she's pulling on that, but she's making it more uncomfortable by making it a giant dead woman instead. But I think it also suggests power. You know, that this figure that's washed up is female and is sort of monstrously large in a way that suggests she may have been very powerful before she died. Whatever the cycle is under the sea, that maybe that cycle is a better one if you're female.
Yeah, interesting. I wondered if maybe it represented in some way, like, this is womanhood, like this giant woman representing all, like, this is what it's like to be a woman in some sense, is the kind of what you have to go through, and the birthing process. Which, hey, granted, man, I've always been, I gotta say it, I've always been glad that I was born a man, because I would never want to go through the process of giving birth. It's wonderful and miraculous, and I'm just glad I'm an observer of that. I can't imagine.
The birth thing for this giant, you know, sort of sea woman doesn't appear to be the same. Like, again, you know, the eggs and the passing off. But I mean, I think it can, but I think, as well as being kind of horrific and pitiable, there is this suggestion that there's enormous power as well.
Yeah. Interesting. I wonder what will become of this girl who's now a young woman, and what will she grow into? What will her future look like? I mean, we see that her mother looks just like a kind of a regular mother, but you got to wonder, like, what the future has in store for her. I hope she does get revenge.
Yes, me too.
Thank you for talking about Livia, because I am such a fan of hers, and I want more people to read her work. I think some of the things that we've seen through with Joe Hill's story and Attila Veres and then some of Livia's stories that you share, the coming of age story. As we mentioned, like the deep well of adolescence from which you can draw so much material for horror. You definitely see that. But even like, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about that some, and I think, not to hammer on the point, but I think that especially in short fiction, that so much of it is gesture or shorthand or relying on the kind of feelings that you can evoke. One, I think all readers have gone through adolescence, which is kind of a period of turbulence, or a period of coming to understand things about the world in a way that I think really meshes onto particularly horror.
Yes.
That kind of feeling of both invulnerability coupled with enormous vulnerability. And also, I think that I was thinking about how a lot of horror, novel length or short story length, even when it is not explicitly a coming of age story, that many of the markers that horror uses to show us that something horrific has happened are tied to children or tied to adolescents, because we are sensitized to feel that the things that happen to children, the things that happen to people who are on the cusp of becoming adults. When bad things happen to them, that is worse than when it happens to adults. And
Yes.
is that true? I don't know, but I recognize that even in detective fiction, that in crime shows, that the level of engagement or prurient interest, or just the sense that something is at risk, is often tied into is there a someone who is young, who is vulnerable,
Yes.
who's coming of age, whose life does not go the way that the audience wants it to, or imagines that they want it to.
Did you see the film When Evil Lurks
I
by Demian
did.
Rugna? I mean, I saw that at the Nashville Film Festival, so it was not like out on Shudder or whatever. It's not streaming. And there was a moment, and there was like a dozen people in the theater. They were all like hardcore moviegoers, probably a lot of horror film fans. And I was sitting on the kind of the row behind most of the folks. And when the scene of the dog grabbing the little girl and shaking her around happens, I could see there wasn't a scream. I just saw people turn, look at the person next to him with his eyes of, oh, nothing is safe. Like, harming a child is the most transgressive thing you can do, I think, in horror. And people just were like,
harming an animal is actually, I believe, the most transgressive thing in all fiction. But I think harming an animal includes using an animal to harm a child. That is a combination of two very transgressive things.
I could just see people
it's a
were
great, terrifying movie. And
it's fantastic.
Yeah.
No, there are images in that film I'd not seen before. The mother walking down the street with the child, in particular, and what she's doing, and snacking and like eating popcorn. I don't want to say too much about it because it's a stark, fantastic image, absolutely horrifying. But people were just like, immediately you could see, once we got to the point with the child, the girl and the dog, you realize like there's nothing this filmmaker won't do. Be prepared. Like, seriously, nothing is sacred here. Anything can happen.
I think I felt that way after having watched Terrified, which has, I think for me, the scene in Terrified of the dead child sitting at the table.
Yes.
Is one of the most horrifying things and moving things that I've seen on a screen.
Yeah, I think Demian Rugna, Argentinian filmmaker Demian Rugna, is the person doing cosmic horror better than anyone else working today. I think I consider it cosmic horror. To me, that's the Terrified seemed very Lovecraftian, that there's a dimension that's just there are things they're waiting to break through, and they kind of look like us, but not really. The twisted versions of us. And it's breaking up, not affecting a house or a person. It's like a whole neighborhood. It's coming through. Anyway, I'm a huge fan of Demian Rugna's work.
Me too.
Yes. We also noticed that between My Father's Mask and The Specialist Hat, playing cards are kind of creepy. There's something about them that is creepy. In many of these stories, the mothers are negligent at best, often complicit in the horror faced by the protagonist, and diabolical at worst. I think you've softened my heart a little bit toward the mother in My Father's Mask. She's trying to kind of preserve what she's got. I don't think she's maybe as bad as I initially thought she was. And then something else I saw here really was like I think in terms of technique, just a lot of the impact of the story is what you choose to reveal, what you choose to imply, and what you choose to obfuscate. And The Specialist Hat is just, every time I read your story, it unfolds a little bit more and a little bit more. I imagine that's one that probably gets taught a lot. Do you have a sense of that? Do you have people tell you they teach your stories in class?
Yeah, and I do think that people teach that. For me, one of the reasons, one, I think that in life that we have to engage with a lot of stuff that we are never going to fully understand. And that things are going to happen to us, and we are never going to fully understand the reasons why they happen, even when they are happening because of other human sort of action. That people are inexplicable even to themselves, and so I do value fiction that preserves that quality. And then I also think that the stories where everything is sort of explained are stories which are much less likely to linger with the reader, that you're able to close them up and shut them down and sort of move on. And even writers like M.R. James, I think, there's a lot of stuff in an M.R. James story. It's a very tidy ghost story writer that he is not going to explain to you. And that's why, I can go back and reread them.
Yes. By the way, you'd mentioned Laird Barron a couple of times. Do you have a favorite Laird Barron story?
I mean,
I couldn't choose, but I could probably do a top 5.
I think most recently Tiptoe is just a knockout story for me. But, I kind of love everything that he writes. I love his novels as well. The horror novel, but also the sort of horror adjacent novels. His sort of
Isaiah Coleridge and that trilogy of novels there. They are just so, especially like Blood Standard, where it's really noir. It's not quite you get into some of the horror. You start to see some of the connections with his broader horror universe or universes, maybe with Worse Angels is the third book there. But no, just even like Blood Standard, very, very much just crime noir. It is just such a pleasure to read. It's so well written.
And such likable characters. It reminded me of John D. MacDonald. Just really solid, well plotted, fabulous books. And I realized, again, I think that aside from Lovecraft, aside from Aikman, I feel like Peter Straub is a big influence on a lot of these writers, in that sense that he does a lot of stuff with language. He can write about both adolescence and coming of age and about the lives of children, but also that he does not feel the need to explain things, but instead he is sometimes just going to move you toward a moment that does not feel like epiphany, but it feels like revelation of something that is sort of just beyond our comprehension.
I think it was I think Ellen Datlow had in her kind of 10-year anniversary book, the best of the best horror of the year. I think she included The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine by Peter Straub. And I tell you what, that I haven't read a lot of Peter Straub. He's on my list to really do a deep dive in, but that was about one of the most disturbing things I'd ever read. And so much of it is just very cryptic. It's very much about the experience, like a Panis Cosmatos movie, Beyond the Black Rainbow or Mandy or the Cabinet of Curiosities episode, The Viewing. It's there's a plot in there, but it's really about the experience of it. And that Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine by Peter Straub was so, I didn't follow everything that was going on. I don't know that everything makes kind of a clear linear sense in real world terms, but it was just so deeply disturbing. It had a very palpable effect, I think.
I would highly recommend reading Mr. Is it Mr. Club and Mr. Cuff or Mr. Cub and Mr. Clough? No, it must be Club and Cuff. It's one of my all-time, and it's very long. It's a novella. The Juniper Tree. He's really an astonishing writer. I love everything that he did. His short stories are a great starting place, but he does a lot of very complicated work linking up his novels together in ways that once you've read enough of them, you begin to see the places where they come together.
One other thing that I keep seeing in your stories is the white cat and the black dog. From the very first story, Dreaming January has a white cat. The second story you wrote, Water Off a Black Dog's Back, if I'm getting that title right. And then, of course, the collection, White Cat, Black Dog. But even in the Book of Love, there's a little, toward the very end, there's a reference to a white cat and a black dog. What do you think's behind that?
I don't know. know, actually. Yeah, I don't know. I think that White Cat's Divorce is pulling from a specific fairy tale, but I think once I introduced the White Cat and was thinking one of the last stories, the second to last story that I wrote was Skinder's Veil, which has the little black dog in that, and I could see very clearly the dog that comes with Skinder when he comes to the door. I had a very clear image of the kind of dog, a sort of round, low dog with a very not quite a malignant face, but a face like an old painting, like a medieval painting of a dog.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I can't tell you why, but it did seem when I was putting the stories together in terms of order to close out with that dog.
Wow. We'll just let those images just kind of haunt us there. I love that. I love that we're not really sure where they came from. You do actually have a black dog now in your home.
I do, a very large black dog.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard Liz Hand or anyone talking about Liz Hand's work? She had a recurring figure that shows up in a lot of her writing, but which she would sort of see in her mind of a boy in a tree, sort of a boy sitting up in a tree, looking down at her, kind of a Dionysian figure.
Yeah.
And I am interested in the sort of images that feel tied in some way to the kind of story that they write.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you have a particular story you'd most like to see adapted to film or comics?
Oh, I would. You mentioned The White Road, and I would not mind that at all. Wizards of Purple, for some reason, is the one that seems to get optioned a lot.
Really?
But it must map onto a kind of story type that Hollywood recognizes as a one of the set of story types that Hollywood and people who work in film find easy to see visually.
Yes.
But if I were to choose, this is going to sound like a weird one, and I don't know how they would do it, but I would love to see Prince Head Underground.
Yeah.
I would love to see. I can see Right Through You is probably the one that I would pick if I could pick anyone. And then
can I ask just real quick, did you have a particular actor in mind as the demon lover? Because I saw Tom Cruise the whole time I was reading it. I think that timeline's probably not right. It's probably, I think it's intended to be maybe more Robert Pattinson age. And yet it is a guy who's later in his career.
I think they'd have to be later in the career. I was thinking very explicitly of a thing that Shiv, the actor who played Spike, said to Joss Whedon when Buffy ended and there was an idea that maybe they would make a movie. And he said, well, you probably have about X number of years that you could realistically make the movie before I would be too old or the actors would be too old. And that has always stuck with me. And I love a vampire TV show. I didn't have a particular set of actors in mind, but instead I had the idea that how strange it must be to do a serialized form of storytelling about somebody who does not change, but you do change. It's the Simpsons problem, except Simpsons are cartoons,
right?
So they can stay that age.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm good with any of those. If some producer out there wants to adapt them, I think that would be great. I think a lot of maybe it's just the realities of the publishing world and kind of how the economy works within publishing. But I feel like writers will tend to like get started on short stories and then move into novels, and then they just write novels from then on. That's what their publishers can sell, make more money off of, and so that's the demand. I believe that I saw you say that you are working on your next novel. I'm kind of wondering what will we see next from you? Are you doing novels from now on? Will you do more short fiction?
I'm writing a short story right now for a magazine that I love, Monkey, which is published from Japan.
Wow.
But I do want to write a very short ghost story novel. I'd like to write a more traditional, 150, 200 page ghost story novel.
Wonderful.
It's very funny to say ghost story novel, but I don't think there's a great word for the ghost story at novel length. It's a ghost story, but it's novel length.
Wow, wonderful. When might we see that? Do you have the story?
I taught all year, so I didn't do much writing. So I have the summer, and I have a couple of other projects, a couple of other short stories that I need to turn into people.
Wonderful.
I don't need to turn stories into people. I need to turn them into editors.
Yes.
But yeah, I am also hoping to get some work done on novel.
You do turn stories into people.
Thank you.
I have been deeply touched by your stories. I just want to tell you,
so much.
It has changed me as a reader, and it has made me. It has made me had to reassess what I understand fiction is able to do, like the powers of fiction. Wow. So, and that's why I have my Kelly Link shrine, because like I'm deeply touched by your stories. So I just personally want to thank you and just say, wow, I can't wait for a new short story, for a new novel. And I'm going to talk about it to everyone who will listen to me. So
thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. You've given me a whole heck of a lot of your time. And this has just been so much fun talking about Joe Hill, Attila Veres, Livia Llewellyn, and Kelly, especially Kelly Link. So best wishes. We are watching for anything new coming down the pike. Really excited about that.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the show.